There is one detail in the LYCAN-X after-action report that every review board has focused on. Not the casualties, not the creature, not even the serum. A single audio fragment recovered from Mia John's comms rig. She records the sound before she understands what it is. It takes 14 seconds before anyone on the team realizes. It's Morse code. Someone, or something, inside that facility is sending a message. And it already knows their names. The installation had been officially decommissioned for 3 years before Unit 0 received the recovery order. Cold Anchor, that was the facility's designation in the black budget ledgers. A subatlantic research station built into the volcanic shelf 40 meters below the surface off the eastern Azores. On paper, it had studied tidal pressure dynamics and deep-water thermal mapping. The paper was fiction. The cages in Sublevel 3 were not built for marine biology. They were built for something that could bend titanium from the inside. Chelsea Spencer knew this before the dive. She had read the fragments, the documents that made it out before the full classification lock sealed them away, and she had briefed her team on exactly 2 things: what they were there to retrieve, and what they were absolutely prohibited from engaging. The data was the mission. The rest was someone else's problem. That was the theory. Mia Johns was the first to notice the acoustic anomaly. Approximately 11 minutes into their descent through the facility's flooded lower access shaft, the installation had been partially inundated during decommissioning a controlled flood, the brief said, to neutralize environmental contamination. But the water was wrong. Still water has a frequency, a baseline silence that the ear learns to read. This water was not silent. Johns tracked the pulse through her acoustic sensor array for 30 seconds before she spoke on comms. She said, "Something is moving structural metal below us. Rhythmic, intentional." Spencer told her to log it and stay on the descent. Johns logged it. She also began counting intervals. Sublevel 2 opened into what the original facility blueprints labeled a medical research wing. The team moved in a modified diamond, Spencer forward, Kirby on the rear anchor, O'Donnell and Albert flanking through corridors that still held emergency power on 40% of their lighting grid. The red strip lights threw long shadows and made everything look like it was bleeding. O'Donnell was point-rating the architecture, flagging structural irregularities for his tablet's layout reconstruction, when Albert stopped at a sealed side hatch and held his fist up. "Team freeze." He pointed at the hatch, then at the wall beside it. The wall had been struck. Not by an explosion, no deformation pattern, consistent with blast. The strikes were regular. Applied. 4 parallel striations per cluster, spaced at exactly the width of an adult male hand. If the fingers had been replaced with something longer, and considerably harder. Kellen Kirby crouched and read the marks without touching them. He looked up at Spencer and said nothing. She had already seen them. Sterling O'Donnell photographed each cluster, documented the strike angle, and then said, very quietly, that the force required to leave those marks in 8mm reinforced bulkhead steel was not achievable by any organism, whose physiology he had access to. Albert said, "Then we're working with incomplete physiology data." O'Donnell said, "Yes. That is exactly what I'm saying." Spencer made the call to push forward. There were 7 levels below them, and the data vault was on sublevel 5. What was on sublevel 3 was someone else's problem. That was still the theory. The audio archive was found intact in a sealed compartment adjacent to what had been the facility's primary medical bay, a watertight storage unit that had survived the controlled flood with its contents preserved. Johns cracked the seal, while Albert secured the corridor behind them, and Kirby moved ahead to check the junction. The unit contained 6 data drives, a sheaf of printed documentation in double-sided laminate, and a single portable audio recorder. O'Donnell took the drives. Spencer took the documents. Johns, without particular decision, just operational reflex, the automatic cataloging of everything, pressed play on the recorder. The voice belonged to a Naval Medical Corps officer. They would later identify him as the facility's chief research physician, a man whose name had been removed from every accessible record, with the kind of thoroughness that requires very senior authorization. His tone in the recording was not panicked. It was worse than panicked. It was clinical, with something wrong underneath it. The way a person sounds when they have discovered something extraordinary and are trying to decide whether that word means what they thought it meant, he said. Subject 0 responded to the LYCAN compound at a rate 40 times the projected uptake. We are past every benchmark. He does not need supplemental oxygen below 60 meters. He does not require caloric intake in any conventional form. He has not slept in 19 days. His reaction time has improved by a factor of 8. His wound closure rate is complete in under 4 minutes for any laceration below arterial depth. Then a pause, a long one. Then, he's been asking for the others, the other subjects. The ones we told him we'd bring. He says he can hear them, downstairs. Another pause. Then, softer. There are no other subjects downstairs. There never were, and we have not told him that yet. Spencer stopped the recording. She looked at the team. Johns was already looking at the acoustic data on her forearm display, the rhythmic pulse she had been tracking since the access shaft. She held it up so Spencer could see. The pattern was no longer ambiguous. It was not structural resonance. It was not environmental noise. Someone in the sublevels below them was striking a pipe. In sequence, in rhythm, in Morse code. Johns had been counting intervals for 22 minutes. She had the full message. She read it aloud to the team. It said, "I know you are here. I counted 5 on the descent. Come to sublevel 4. I only want to show you something. D." The team looked at each other. Dominic Albert said, "D." He said it again. He was looking at Spencer. She was already looking at O'Donnell, because O'Donnell had the personnel records on his tablet. The fragmentary, partially redacted service records of the facility's research subjects. O'Donnell pulled up the one file they had. Subject 0's original identity had been almost entirely removed, but the first initial had survived the redaction. It was D. Chelsea Spencer made a command decision that she would later refuse to classify as a mistake. She split the team. Kirby and Albert held sub-level 2 with the recovered drives and documentation. Their extraction priority was now those materials, full stop, regardless of what happened below. Spencer, Johns, and O'Donnell descended to sublevel 3 as a combat element. Kirby objected, once, in the specific tone that means objection is logged, rather than pursued. Spencer acknowledged it. The decision stood. Sublevel 3 was not flooded. That was the first anomaly. The controlled inundation had been architected to stop at the bulkhead junction between level 2 and 3, and the junction's sealed integrity was intact. The air in sublevel 3 was cold and stale and breathable, which should not have been possible for a sealed compartment running on residual emergency power in a subatlantic installation. The atmospheric sensors on John's rig registered the oxygen content at 22.3%, slightly above surface normal. Spencer noted this and did not comment on it. O'Donnell commented on it. Johns told him to stay on sensor coverage. The cages were in the central chamber of sublevel 3. The briefing documents had mentioned them. The briefing documents had not adequately conveyed them. There were 12 arranged in 2 parallel rows of 6. Constructed from titanium alloy composite rated for marine salvage applications. Each cage approximately 4 meters by 4 meters by 3 meters high. 11 of the 12 were empty. The 12th was open. Not forced, not torn, not bent, not broken through. Opened. The locking mechanism on the 12th cage had been disengaged from the inside. The key turn mechanism rotated by something with sufficient finger dexterity to manipulate a precision lock. That detail sat in Spencer's mind and would not leave. She kept walking. The sound started before they reached the junction for sublevel 4. Not Morse code this time. Something lower, more complex. A kind of layered resonance that Mia Johns identified as vocalization after 6 seconds of analysis. She said so to Spencer and stopped walking at the same time. Spencer stopped walking. O'Donnell, whose eyes had been on his tablet, walked one more step before his body registered the sound and stopped him from the inside out. A precognitive freeze, older than training, older than language. The sound was coming from above them, not below. They all looked up. Subject 0 was on the ceiling. It was gripping the structural conduit channels that ran along the upper corridor in horizontal tracks, gripping with the bone blade hands inverted, weight entirely supported by those 4-point contacts with no visible effort. The enormous body hung with a casual, terrible ease that made every known parameter of what a body can do feel like a suggestion rather than a law. The amber eyes were open and still, not frantic, not predatory in any hunting sense, but attentive. Specifically, observationally attentive, the way a person looks at something they have been waiting a long time to see. It dropped to the floor. The impact was almost silent. 400 pounds of reconstructed biology, landing on a metal floor, with the acoustic signature of a careful footstep. It straightened, 8 feet, 2 inches. The amber pulse, slow and dominant. It looked at Spencer, then at O'Donnell, then at Johns, then back to Spencer. It said, "You're not the contractors." The voice was not monstrous. That was the worst part. It was low and roughened, the vocal cords clearly restructured around a different resonating architecture. But it carried cadence and inflection. It carried the ghost of speech patterns that had belonged to a person, a naval officer. Sterling O'Donnell later said that the thing that unmade him was not the body, not the scale, not the bone blades, it was the grammar. Subject Zero used the word not, a negation, a distinction. Whatever had happened in this facility, whatever the LYCAN compound had restructured at the cellular and skeletal and neurological level, it had not touched the operational mind inside. "I read your approach signatures on the hydroacoustic grid," Subject Zero said. 5 bodies. 2 held position on level 2. You left your heaviest man behind. It turned and began walking toward the sublevel for access, moving with a loping, long-limbed efficiency that ate distance without seeming to hurry, over its shoulder. Without slowing, the rest of the data vault is not on level 5. The contractors moved it when they realized I could open the cage. "Come." Spencer did not follow immediately. She held the team in position for 7 seconds, running the tactical calculus. Subject Zero had shown no aggression. It had communicated in English using complex syntax. It had demonstrated knowledge of their formation that implied long-range sensory capacity. It had, most significantly, referred to the facility's contractors, the same contractors who had classified the post-decommission documentation faster than the unit that had written it. These variables did not produce a clean answer. They produced a murkier one, which in Spencer's experience was often more trustworthy than clean ones. She said, "Weapons ready, distance maintained. We follow." They followed. Sublevel 4 was where the facility kept its secrets inside its secrets. The chamber, Subject Zero, led them to had not appeared on any blueprint in their pre-mission documentation. A void in the architecture, deliberate, built around and over, until it ceased to exist on paper. It was a server room, or had been. The servers were still running. Cold Anchor had never been fully decommissioned. The power was not residual. The power was active, current, intentional. Someone was still paying the bill. And the servers contained. O'Donnell accessed the nearest terminal with shaking hands, and read the directory header aloud. Not research data. Personnel records. Subject records. Not 12 subjects. Not the 12 indicated by the cage count above. Subject Zero watched him read, and said, 8. The transmission arrived on Mia John's comms rig 14 minutes after they accessed the sublevel for server room. Not on the standard Unit 0 encrypted frequency. On a legacy frequency, one that had been retired from JSOC operational use in 2017, which meant it was known only to personnel active before that date. Which meant the person transmitting had either been in this program for a very long time, or had access to program archives that were not supposed to exist in accessible form. The message was short. It was voice unencrypted, which was either a profound operational security failure or a deliberate act of visibility. It said, "Spencer, stand down. Do not engage the subject. Do not extract the subject. Do not damage the servers. Your secondary mission parameters have now been activated. Acknowledge. No identification. No rank. No name." Spencer looked at Subject Zero. Subject Zero was looking at the comms rig. Its expression, to the extent that the rebuilt facial architecture allowed expression, was entirely without surprise. It said, "Secondary parameters. A flat statement, not a question. It had heard the transmission. It had, apparently, known what secondary parameters meant before Spencer had been told they existed. O'Donnell was typing rapidly, pulling the server records, cross-referencing personnel files, and he said, without looking up, "The secondary parameters are in the briefing package. In the sealed annex, the one marked for officer in charge eyes only." He looked up. "Chelsea." He pushed the tablet toward her. "Spencer, read the annex." Her face did not change while she read it. When she finished, she set the tablet face down on the server housing and stood very still for 4 seconds. Then she said, "The mission was never the drives." Albert's voice came over, "Comes from level 2. He had heard the transmission on the shared channel. He said, "Spencer, talk to me." She didn't answer him. She was looking at the injector unit clipped to O'Donnell's sealed gray canister, the non-standard equipment no quartermaster had issued, the one Sterling had been carrying since the dive briefing without explaining what it was for. O'Donnell's hand had moved, without his apparent conscious instruction, 3 inches toward that canister. Subject Zero moved first. Not toward Spencer. Toward O'Donnell. It covered the distance, in a single motion, not the bone blade hands, not the combat capability the body implied. It simply stepped between O'Donnell and the canister, and put its body in the path. Facing O'Donnell, amber eyes, slow pulse. It said, "The serum is in that canister, a refined variant. The contractors want a new generation vector, healthier baseline, better uptake, no psychotic break at stage 2. They wanted someone to carry it out of here in their bloodstream." It looked at Spencer. "You didn't know. That's why they chose you." It looked back at O'Donnell. He knew. O'Donnell said nothing. His hand had stopped moving. His face was the face of a man who has been carrying something too heavy for too long and has just been relieved of it, which looked almost identical to the face of a man who has just been caught. Subject Zero reached out, one bone blade hand, moving with a precision that should not have been possible in those structures, and carefully removed the gray canister from O'Donnell's rig. It held it without crushing it. It looked at the label. It said, 11 years in this facility. 86 other subjects before me, and they still think the problem was the formula. It turned and walked to the server housing. It set the canister on the housing. It picked up Spencer's tablet, the one she had set face down, and it typed, quickly, accurately, with modified fingers that could have destroyed the device with any uncontrolled force, typing instead, with the gentlest possible pressure, opening the server's broadcast module, and transmitting the full 87 subject records, the complete research history, the contractor payment ledgers, and the secondary mission parameters, to a list of addresses that Subject Zero had apparently had memorized for 3 years. Mia Johns watched her sensor array light up as the transmission went out across multiple simultaneous channels. She said, quietly, "That just went to 12 separate news organizations, 4 congressional oversight addresses, and 1 JSOC internal affairs flag." She paused. In the International Maritime Court, Subject Zero, still facing the server, said 11 years is a long time to learn a COM system. Chelsea Spencer made her second command decision. She retrieved the gray canister from the server housing, sealed it in her own evidence pouch, and designated it for Unit 0 containment. Not contractor retrieval, not JSOC evidence lockup. Unit 0. Her unit, her chain. She looked at O'Donnell, who had not moved. She said, "You and I will discuss your briefing status when we're topside." She turned to Subject Zero. The massive figure had not moved since completing the transmission. It stood with its back to them, amber pulse, barely visible, in the peripheral bioluminescence, and it was very quiet. Spencer said, "We can't take you out." Subject Zero said, "I know," she said. "The transmission you just sent. It will take 6 months minimum before any oversight body can act on it. The contractors will move on this facility before that." Subject Zero turned. It looked at her for a long moment. It said, "I've been here 11 years. I'm very good at keeping them out." Its hand, the bone blade structure, the 4 fused phalanges, rose and touched the surgical scar on its left shoulder. The original injection site. I know exactly what I am. That's more than I can say for the people who made me. The team extracted through sub-level 2. Kirby and Albert had held position and held their questions. For the 40 minutes the others had been below, Albert's questions had weight in them that he carried up the access shaft without voicing. On the surface, in the Atlantic pre-dawn, treading water beside the extraction vessel, with the evidence pouch sealed against Spencer's chest, Sterling O'Donnell finally spoke. He said, "The contractors would have paid us both." Spencer looked at him. She said, "I know." He said, "I almost." She said, "I know." The extraction vessel ran south toward the carrier group. Below them, 40 meters down, the red emergency strips in the cold anchor corridors pulsed slow and amber in the dark water, like a heartbeat, like eyes. The last thing Mia Johns heard before the acoustic range dropped below sensor threshold was a sound from sub-level 3, a low-layered vocalization moving through the facility's conduit channels. Not Morse code, not a message. Something older than language, and more precise than any of it. She logged the timestamp, and closed the file and did not listen to it again. Sterling O'Donnell was placed on indefinite administrative review, pending a closed-door inquiry that does not appear in any documented JSOC proceeding. Chelsea Spencer filed a full operational report to Unit 0 Command that, according to her own records, was acknowledged and then immediately archived at the highest classification tier available. The gray canister, the refined LYCAN-X serum variant, is listed in Unit 0's evidence inventory as of the date of extraction. Its current location within that inventory is listed as pending transfer. The transfer has not occurred. The contractor organization that built Cold Anchor funded the AT-7 subject research program and embedded secondary mission parameters into a Black Ops Unit 0 briefing package has not been publicly identified. The 12 news organizations that received Subject Zero's transmission published nothing. Their editorial directorates cited a range of reasons: insufficient sourcing, unverifiable documentation, national security consultation. One journalist, the only one who responded to the transmission before the silence settled in, reported receiving a follow-up communication 24 hours later from an unknown origin in Morse code. It said, "There are more facilities. They are still running. You will not find them from the surface. If you're still thinking about what was in that gray canister, and who else was supposed to carry it out, subscribe to The World Behind Midnight and uncover the next operation before it disappears. Because some secrets are best left behind midnight."